So, with our interface finally completed, it's now time to write some media queries to optimize it for smaller screens. Now, we have learned about how to do this before in this course, so it's not really something new at this point. However, what is new is how easy Flexbox makes the process of making our layout completely responsive, with just a small amount of code. So in this lecture and the next one, that's what we're going to do, so that I can actually show you how easy it is and not just tell you. Now about the breakpoints, this time we're going to use a different strategy. So we're going to use that strategy where we basically set the breakpoints to where the design starts to break. Okay, so that's what I called back then the perfect way of doing stuff. Now we're still going to keep the old breakpoints that we used in the other project in mind as well, but only if there's actually something that breaks at this width. Okay, so let's now start taking a look and set this here to mobile, right? So that we have our responsive layout in this nice view here. Now this is what I wanted to reduce. And so, all right, let's start decreasing this. So you see we are at 1500 pixels approximately now. Okay, and so now we're at about 1200. Okay, and that's the max width that we defined for our container here. Remember that? So the container here has 120 rem, so 1200 pixels basically. So if we start decreasing furthermore, then of course the width becomes 100% of the available viewport width, because that's exactly what max width here does. Okay, now but we want to change something here, which is actually removing this part here from the top. Okay, because that starts to look a bit weird. So what I'm trying to say is that our first breakpoint should be at 1200 pixels. Okay, so as soon as we approach this here, then we move the container all the way up here to the top, and so we don't have this pink background color anymore, neither at the sides nor at the top. Okay, so that is going to be our first breakpoint. Now about the media queries themselves, in the last project we actually wrote that huge media query manager, but right now I want to keep it simple here, okay? And so all we're going to do is just write out the media queries in the old way. So let's go here to our layout and to our container. And so all we have to do is to add the media query in here. So media only screen, and then our condition. Now keep in mind that once again we are using a desktop first strategy, right? And so our media queries here will be of the type max width. So just like in the other project we did before. So max width and 1200 pixels. Now two things about that. First, we should have this width here in ems because of the reasons that I explained to you in the last project. And second, I actually want this to be variables, okay? So that I don't have to write out this number here all the time, each time that I'm going to use it. Okay, so let's do that in the base CSS. Now probably you think that we will do it as a CSS custom property, right? But the thing is that that doesn't work. Okay, so we cannot declare one of these variables here and then use it in a media query here in this place. That simply doesn't work. CSS doesn't allow it to work. So we have to do it with Sass variables. Okay, and so that's absolutely no problem at all. We can mix CSS custom properties and use them for some use cases and then use Sass variables for other stuff. So no problem at all. So remember, this is how we declare Sass variables. I'm going to call it BP for breakpoint, and then this one is the largest, and it's 75 rem. Okay, and let me show that to you. So 1200 divided by 16 is 75. So 75 M. So not rem, but M is what I want. So 1200 pixels, just so that we can remember it later when we use it. Okay, so that's the largest breakpoint. And so now we can actually use this. So let's copy it. And all right. So that is our media query for the container. And what do we actually want to change here? Well, it's very simple. All we want to do is to set the margin to 0, right? So before we had 8 rem top and bottom and auto on the left and the right side to center the container inside its parent element. But right now we don't need that anymore because it's already filling the entire viewport anyway. So just margin 0 should fix that, okay? And actually, yeah, it's already working. So we approach 1200 here and then bam, all the margins disappear. And up here you also can already see our media query, right? All right, and I think that's all we have to change actually for this width. So let's now continue to move down a little bit. Okay, and it starts looking a bit weird down here already. Okay, but let's keep going just a bit. Okay, and now you see that down here it's also now moving to a new line, and so that's not really ideal. And so what I want to do is to keep here at 1100 and change the global font size, and that will then decrease all the length which are measured in rem, right? So once more, that's exactly what we did with the Nators project, decreasing the font size, which are sized in rem, which in turn depends on the global font size. So this is our next breakpoint. So large and 1100 divided by 16 is 68.75. All right, so 1100 pixels. And actually that one is here right in the base file. So let's just include it here. So add media only for screens and max width of BP large. All right, so right now our font size is 62.5%, which makes it so that one rem is 10 pixels. Now let's decrease that to 8 pixels. Okay, so 8 divided by 16 is of course 50%. So font size 50%. And that's actually it. So let's test that out. And yeah, that looks better. But actually we have another problem here now, which is that the space here is back. And that's because the 120 rem that we defined for the width of the container are now no longer 1200 pixels, but instead they are, let's calculate that, so 120 rem, which are now only 8 pixels, and so that's now only 960 pixels, and no longer 1200 pixels. So let's just very quickly fix that, and saying here in the layout for the container that right now the max width should be 100%, and we can also say that the width should be 100%, just to be 100% sure. Okay, and so now that should be fixed, and yeah. So we hit 1100 and then bam, here we go. Now we still see some space down here. Let me see where that came from. So where's that container? And actually there shouldn't be any space. But yeah, of course, if we increase the page here like this, then it has to show something, right? So the container, it ends here and it has no margin, but we still have a part of the page if our screen is this big. And so then it will, of course, show the background gradient that we defined for the body. Okay, so if we reduce the viewport, then it will no longer show. But if we increase it, and let me show that to you even more. Well, actually I cannot. But for example, if the viewport was like this, then even more of this pink color here would be created. But that's not a problem at all, so let's not worry about that, okay? The only thing that's not perfect here is this situation right now, but let's fix that in another way, okay? So let me inspect these elements here. And what I'm simply going to do is to decrease this margin here a bit more. So 0.8, 0.9. So let's put it at -2 rem. Okay, and so then that should no longer occur in no width at all. So let's come here to our components, overview, button, and list. And so here we are in the recommend. And so let's put this one here at -2 rem. So instead of having to write another media query here. Okay, so that's fixed now. So let's keep moving down with our width. And for now, everything still keeps looking great, right? And now we have that problem here again with the images. Okay, so let's actually add a new media query here at 900. Okay, because at this point, everything starts to look a bit too narrow here. Like the side nav is already becoming very narrow, and so is this column here, and especially the review column. Okay, so we're getting less and less space here, and that becomes even more dramatic as we decrease it further down. Okay, so here at 900, let's make another breakpoint. And what we're going to do is to basically put this navigation here, which is now a sidebar, all the way here on the top, so spanning from the left to the right, with all of these 4 navigation items side by side, so that then this part down here, so the hotel view, which is all of this here, can occupy a 100% of the viewport width. Okay, and that will buy us some more space. So that shouldn't be all too hard to do. So let's just check out which element we're talking about, and that is the content here, right? So the content is the element that has both of these things that we were talking about. So the sidebar and the hotel view, right? So the content is already set to flex, so it's a Flexbox container, because remember, we positioned these 2 elements here side by side using Flexbox. And so now all we have to do, if we want to put one on top of the other, is to change the flex direction, right? Because right now it's a row, and so all we have to do is to change it to a column. So let's do that. And first let's create another breakpoint here, or another variable for a breakpoint. And so after large comes medium, and 900 pixels divided by 16 is 65.25. 56, I believe it was. Right? Just to be sure. So 56.25 m equals 900 pixels. Okay, so let's come here to our layout again. Let me actually copy this one so I don't have to write it out all the time. And so remember, the one that we want to manipulate here is the content. So at the medium breakpoint, what we want to change is the flex direction to column. And that will put our navigation on top and the hotel overview beneath it. So let's test that as we hit 900 pixels, and here we go. So great, we have the sidebar here stretching all the way to the right side, and then down there the hotel view occupying 100% of the available width. So that's great. So now we're back to having more space down here. All right. So next up, let's put these items here side by side, because it doesn't make much sense to be like this, right? And also I'm gonna get rid of this text here actually, because we want to have the navigation, and then right after that we want to start the hotel overview and not see any of this text over there, okay? So let's go to the navigation, and I think that's a component right here at the beginning. So it should be, yeah, here it is. So the side nav. So remember that we want to put the items all beside each other, right? So all we have to do is to set its parent to flex, right? So making all of the items flex items, which will then automatically be side by side. Now, of course, we have to do this in a media query. So let me copy that. And of course, this code here should be in the media query and not just out there. All right, so let's take a look at that. And all right, so it's starting to look pretty good already. They are now nicely side by side. Let's just get rid of this margin here. So margin 0. So that margin top that we had here, we don't want that anymore. And then, as I was saying, let's get rid of the legal text also. And what I want to copy is actually this media query. So display none. All right, so the legal text will be gone now. And just to check it. Okay, so that looks good already. Now what we should do here, of course, is to make each of them occupy 1/4 of this entire width here, right? So basically what we want them to do is to occupy this entire width. And let's do that. And of course, that's not really hard at all. So how are we going to do that? Well, it's very simple. We set flex to 1, okay? And so we give all of these 4 flex items the ability to grow as much as they can. And since they all have the same flex value, which is 1, they will all occupy the same space. Okay, and now just here, let's remove that margin from the bottom. And so now we should be pretty much done with it. Okay, let's actually zoom a bit in here. So 75%. And that looks pretty good to me. Now maybe we should also center this content here inside of the box, right? So let's do that as well. So it's in the link, right? And so let's put that media query in here. So what do we have to do in order to horizontally align these items? Well, all we have to do is justify content, center, as we've been doing so many times. Okay, and now let's just actually increase the padding as well. So let's say 2 rem, and here we go. So that looks perfect, right? Now just some smaller fixes that we should do here as well is to maybe decrease all of this padding that we have here. So all of this excessive white space that we really don't have space for at this viewport width. Okay, so let's get rid of all that. And for that, let's remember that this element here is the detail. Okay, and so here we should definitely decrease the padding, and the same then here for the description and probably the reviews as well. Okay, so let's do that. Just copy this media query. And so let's do that. So legal, we already changed that. The overview. And actually this is in the layout, right? So it's actually here in the detail. So we want a padding of 3 rem now, no longer 4.5. Okay, then next let's check the description. So here we can actually leave a padding of 2 rem, I would say. It was 3, so let's decrease it to 2. And now the margin right also needs to change, because remember that this margin right here of 4.5 was the exact same value as the padding here on the detail. So we should probably decrease that one to 3 as well. So 3 rem. Okay, now where is the review? So list, recommend, here we go. So the review, I'm also going to decrease the padding in here. Now the media query is gone. So let's copy it again. So padding 2 rem, and that's actually okay like that. And since we're here, let's also decrease the margin at the bottom to 3 rem. Okay, and yeah, let's just check if we have something else to change. So I think this section here can also need some less space. Okay, so let's say 2.5 rem and 0 down from 3.5. All right, so let's check that. And yeah, that looks a bit more natural, I believe, right? So without all of this space that we had before. And the same here in the CTA section as well. So if we now decrease this here, we should be good to go for a long time. So for a long range of width. Okay, so it still looks good, except this here. And maybe we should find another fix for this here as well. So let me actually go here to the components and to the recommend. So these photos here are these ones. And if we want them to stay always side by side, we can actually achieve that with Flexbox. So let's set the container to display flex. And then these elements, so these flex items, they will just stay side by side all the time. So yeah, just like this. And so that's a very easy fix for that problem. All right, so we're still good here, I believe. There's no major problems at any point. So I think that the next breakpoint could be, for example, here 600 pixels, such as we had in our other project. So 600 I think is a pretty good breakpoint in this project. It's a good point to make some more changes in here in this interface, right? But I'm actually leaving that for the next video. So if you want to do that right now, then just come with me right to that next lecture.